Welcome to the world of sci-fi stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. Aliens Horrified, as Deathworlders complete 100-year survival course in a day. Valtek Zor-7 adjusted his respiratory filtration unit for the third time that morning, not because it needed adjusting. The thing was perfectly calibrated as always, but because fidgeting was the only way to manage his mounting dread. Today of all cursed days in his 47-cycle career as chief survival instructor at the Galactic Federation Academy was the day they'd send him humans by the 7 moons of Karks. He muttered his voice box, emitting a grating metallic buzz that his assistant Plex recognized as nervous laughter. They expect me to train death. Worlders me, the same instructor who once had to cancel class because the simulation rain was too acidic at 6. Plex's eye stalks twisted in what passed for amusement among the gluten species. The paperwork came directly from Admiral Norbold himself. Apparently the humans completed their application in under an hour. The review board didn't even have time to reject them before they submitted all 177,000 forms. "Oh, fantastic!" Valtek exclaimed, slapping all 4 of his upper appendages against his desk. "So not only are they supposedly indestructible, they're also bureaucratically efficient. What's next? Will they breathe fire, shoot lasers from their eyes?" The survival course, famously known as the Century Challenge, had been designed to take precisely 100 galactic standard years to complete. No species had ever finished it in less than 87. Most didn't finish it, all their representatives eventually slinking back to their homeworlds with scorched exoskeletons and severely depleted confidence. The course was intended that way, a diplomatic method of reminding upstart civilizations of their proper place in the cosmic hierarchy. Their transport arrives in 20 minutes, Sulex noted, checking the chronometer embedded in his left claw. "Should I prepare the welcome nutrients? The standard ammonia-methane blend?" "Perhaps no, VC sighed, his secondary heart valve fluttering with resignation. "They apparently drink water plain. Unadulterated dihydrogen monoxide. I've had the maintenance droids sterilize some. Apparently they can die without it. Imagine a species so fragile they need constant hydration. It's so hardy they evolved on a planet with free roaming apex predators and weather that changes daily. Make it make sense." Plex made a sound that resembled a balloon deflating. "Perhaps the rumors are exaggerated, sir. Surely no carbon-based life form could survive radiation levels above 3 radiatus or temperatures fluctuating more than 10 degrees in a single cycle. We'll see soon enough," Valtek replied, checking the readiness of the training grounds. Through the panoramic view screen, the barren, carefully controlled landscape of Training Sector 7 had been modified according to the bizarre specifications sent over by the human diplomatic corps. They'd requested things like gravity at 9.8 ns2 and oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere in day-night cycles of 24 standard hours. Absolute madness. Valtek took a final look at his pristine, danger-free office. He had a sinking feeling that nothing would be the same after today. "Their ship is entering the docking sequence," announced the Academy Central human representatives arriving at Bay 12. "All personnel advised to maintain safe distance of at least 3 meters due to potentially hazardous thermal output and unpredictable movement patterns." "Well," Valtek said, straightening his ceremonial survival instructor sash, "Layton, go greet the monster's human arrival." And initial reactions from aliens VTEC and Plex stood at the edge of docking Bay 12. Maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance, the massive airlock doors slid open with an ominous hiss, releasing a gust of what sensors identified as nitrogen, oxygen, and most alarmingly water vapor. "They travel in steam," Plex whispered, his voice Ador barely audible. "Are they completely insane?" Before Valtek could respond, 3 figures emerged from the mist. They actually walked on 2 limbs instead of hovering, slithering, or teleporting like civilized species directly toward them. With a confident gait that sent shivers down all 4 of VC's spine segments. "Hiya, you must be the welcoming committee." The tallest human extended a 5-fingered appendage, its face contorted into what Valek called Cultural database identified as a smile the bearing of teeth that somehow wasn't meant as a threat. Display on Commander Chen Earth Expeditionary Force. These are my colleagues Dr. Maya Rodriguez and Lieutenant Jamal Washington Valtek, stared at the outstretched limb, with horror direct physical contact with a creature whose internal temperature was a blistering 37 degrees C. He tentatively extended his least favorite manipulator appendage, prepared to sacrifice it. If necessary, the pleasure is entirely yours. Tech replied using the traditional galactic greeting for dangerous species. I am Senior Survival Instructor Valtek Zor 7, and this is Assistant Instructor Plex. The touch was warm, disturbingly warm, like holding a power coupling that might explode at any moment. Dapper Rodriguez, the one with longer head filaments, laughed. The sound was jarring, loud, and completely unnecessary. Don't worry, we don't bite well, not unless the protein rations run out. She winked at Valtek, who involuntarily retracted his eye stalks for protection. A joke that was a joke, Lieutenant Washington clarified, noticing Plex slowly backing away. We're actually very excited to be the first humans to attempt your famous survival course. Valtek regained his composure, all 8 of his breathing tubes fluttering with forced calm. Yes, well, about that, I feel obligated to inform you that the Century Challenge has never been completed in less than 87 galactic standard years. The typical graduate age is 140. We've prepared accommodations for your great-great-grand offspring to complete the final O. We plan to knock it out today. Commander Chen interrupted, checking a primitive timepiece strapped to his wrist. Maybe tomorrow morning, if things get hairy, we got a diplomatic reception back on Europa next Tuesday. The surrounding staff of 47 different species went completely silent. A flown diplomat actually lost buoyancy and sank to the ground with shock today. Valtek repeated, certain his universal translator had malfunctioned the entire Century Challenge today. Is that a problem? Lieutenant Washington asked, taking a casual sip from a container of plain water in public, as if it were nothing. We reviewed the course outline. Seems pretty straightforward. Tox, atmosphere, survival, temperature extremes, predator evasion, resource scarcity, then the combined final standard vacation activities. Where we come from, vacation. Plex whispered, his color shifting to the pale green of extreme distress. They do this for fun. A small crowd of Academy students had gathered at a safe distance, pointing and murmuring. The 10th Elan student was recording the humans with all 17 of its visual appendages, presumably to show its spawn that the legends were true. Right this way to orientation. Valtek managed, wondering if retirement was still an option. And please try not to touch anything or breathe too heavily or exist too loudly. The humans followed, chatting among themselves about something called coffee and whether there would be time for sightseeing after acing this cute little obstacle course. Overview of the course and alien skepticism. The orientation theater was designed to accommodate beings of all physiologies, with specialized seating for gas-based entities, anti-gravity platforms for high-density species, and temperature-controlled hibernation pods for those who entered torpor during lengthy presentations. The humans annoyingly just sat in standard chairs, looking perfectly comfortable. The Century Challenge BTEC began activating the holographic display. With a flick of his third manipulator, consists of 5 progressive survival scenarios, each designed to test the limits of sentient endurance. The course was established by the Galactic Federation's Diplomatic Corps as a method of, shall we say, tempering the enthusiasm of newly spacefaring species. Lieutenant Washington raised his hand. So it's basically hazing for baby civilizations. Vex respiratory sacs contracted in shock. It is a dignified tradition, spanning 14 million cycles, not some primitive initiation ritual. Sounds like hazing to me, Dara Rodriguez whispered to Commander Chen, loud enough for the entire auditorium to hear. Several gaseous entities condensed slightly in embarrassment. As I was saying, Valtek continued, his voice modulator raising 2 octaves. Most species spent decades mastering each level. The first challenge alone, surviving toxic atmospheric conditions, typically requires 20 years of gradual adaptation. The hologram showed various aliens in protective suits, many unconscious, or being dragged to medical facilities, what exactly qualifies as toxic? Commander Chen asked, scrolling through a handheld device. Your information packet is a bit vague on the specifics. Plex stepped forward with a data pad. The atmospheric chamber contains trace elements of chlorine, sulfur dioxide, and methane, with oxygen levels reduced to 15% and temperatures fluctuating between 10 and 40 degrees. See, the humans exchanged glances, then burst into synchronized laughter. What Vault demanded what could possibly be amusing about potentially lethal conditions. Rodriguez wiped her eyes. Sorry, it's just I grew up in Los Angeles. That's basically a good air quality day. And I was stationed in Dubai, added Lieutenant Washington. 40 degrees is beach weather. A murmur rippled through the assembled alien observers. A crystalline being from Real 9 shattered itself in disbelief, its fragments tinkling to the floor. The second challenge, Valtek pressed on, determined to wipe the smiles from their soft, flexible faces, involves surviving temperature extremes ranging from -20 to 100 degrees C, like Minnesota in January to Death Valley in August. Got it, Commander. Chen nodded, looking supremely unbothered. What's challenge 3? Tech's confidence was evaporating faster than water on Pius 7. Predator evasion. You'll face our most aggressive bioengineered hunter. Cool. Do we get weapons? Lieutenant Washington perked up. Certainly not. You must survive using only your natural abilities. Oh, Washington's face fell slightly. So just running and hiding boring. But okay, the sound Valtek made wasn't translatable in any known language. First challenge, toxic atmosphere survival. The atmospheric challenge chamber was a massive geodesic dome, its transparent walls revealing the swirling yellow-green gases within. In observation platforms surrounded it at various heights, now crowded with Academy instructors and students eager to witness the humans' inevitable failure. Standard protocol allows for a preparation period of 3 months, Plex explained, offering the humans specially designed environmental suits. Each suit was a technological marvel, crafted from rare metamaterials and equipped with filtration systems so advanced they required their own AI. Commander Chen examined the suit briefly, then handed it back. Thanks, but we're good. Tech's primary heart stuttered. Perhaps I failed to adequately communicate the danger. The atmosphere inside contains multiple toxic compounds that will damage your respiratory systems, burn your exposed dermis, and potentially cause permanent sensory impairment. Yeah, we got that part, Dr. Rodriguez replied, pulling what looked like a simple fabric mask from her pocket and securing it over her nose and mouth. Standard 95. Mask should filter out the particulates. As for the rest, well, we've all been teargas at protests before you were attacked with chemical weapons on your home planet. Cast an Etherian diplomat, their luminescent tendrils pulsating with horror. Tuesday afternoons in grad school, Rodriguez shrugged. The university police were really touchy about tuition hikes. Lieutenant Washington was applying a clear substance to his exposed skin, petroleum jelly, he explained, noticing Plex's fascinated stare. Creates a barrier. Old military trick. Valtek frantically consulted the rulebook. This is unprecedented. The suits are mandatory safety equipment. Actually, Commander Chen pointed to a subsection of the regulations displayed on a nearby screen. It says participants must utilize appropriate protective measures. Doesn't specify what those measures must be. The Academy's legal representative, a hyper-evolved contract entity from the Parago system, reluctantly confirmed this interpretation with a dispirited flicker of its contract clauses. Fine. Valtek threw all 4 hands up in exasperation. Enter the chamber. Then the standard completion time is 20 years, with participants gradually increasing their exposure from 5 minutes to full immersion. Your first session should. We'll just do the whole thing now, Lieutenant Washington interrupted, stretching his limbs in what appeared to be a casual warm-up routine. How long do we need to stay into Path 1? Full planetary rotation, 30 hours in Academy Standard Time, Plex replied. But no species has ever perfect. See you tomorrow morning, Dr. Rodriguez said as she checked her watch. The 3 humans approached the airlock without hesitation. A horrified silence fell over the observation deck as the inner door closed behind them, and the toxic atmosphere engulfed their fragile forms. The monitoring systems immediately began tracking their vital signs, projecting the data onto large displays for all to see. Heart rate slightly elevated but within normal parameters, reported a medical technician, their voice tinged with disbelief. Oxygen saturation at 94%, respiration labored, but functional. Core temperature stable. Valtek pressed against the viewport, watching as the humans simply walked through the swirling toxic clouds, occasionally coughing or rubbing their eyes, but otherwise fine. "This is impossible," he muttered. They should be unconscious within minutes. 4 hours later, the humans were sitting in a circle on the chamber floor, apparently playing some sort of card game and laughing in a toxic atmosphere that had once caused a draconian ambassador whose species evolved in volcanic vents to request emergency evacuation. "Should we check if they're still alive?" Plex whispered, unable to believe the readouts. "They're playing something called poker and wagering with nutrient bars," replied the technician, monitoring their communications. "The tall one, Chen, is apparently cleaning up because Rodriguez has a tell when she's bluffing." Valtek sank into a support harness. "They're treating it like a recreational activity. A toxic atmosphere. Second challenge, extreme temperature variations. They passed." Plex announced, his voice modulator barely functioning through his disbelief. 30 hours in toxic atmospheric conditions with minimal protection, and their vital signs never dropped below 90% of baseline. The humans emerged from the chamber looking slightly disheveled, but otherwise unharmed. Lieutenant Washington had a mild rash on his forearms. Commander Chen's eyes were somewhat bloodshot. Rodriguez was sneezing occasionally. "That was it. 3 decades of survival training completed overnight." "That was interesting," Commander Chen said diplomatically. "The sulfur compounds gave it a nice kick. Reminded me of Beijing, circa 2040, before the air scrubbers." Valtek was desperately recalibrating his expectations and the environmental controls for the next chamber. "The temperature extremity challenge," he announced with forced confidence, "will test your ability to withstand rapid shifts between extreme cold and extreme heat. Most species require specialized adaptations or technology to survive even brief exposure to such conditions." Dr. Rodriguez yawned, as if bored by the prospect. "What's the temperature range again?" -20 C to +100 C. Plex replied, a hint of malicious hope in his voice. "The chamber cycles between extremes every 2 hours. The minimum survival time is 60 hours, with most species requiring medical intervention after the first cycle." Lieutenant Washington chuckled. "So basically Chicago weather, but more predictable." Chicago questioned a confused Vess. "Ambassador, Windy City, Midwest. Gets so cold your spit freezes before it hits the ground in January, then hot enough to fry eggs on the sidewalk in August," Washington explained. "We used to joke that if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes and it'll change." VTEC ignored this banter and gestured toward a rack of thermal regulation suits. "These are mandatory." "Or let me guess," Commander Chen interrupted. "Not actually mandatory according to the fine print." The contract entity flickered affirmatively, radiating an emotion best translated as bureaucratic disappointment. "We'll take some basic gear though," Rodriguez said, selecting a pair of insulated gloves. "No sense being uncomfortable if we don't have to be." The humans chose minimal protective items, gloves, thermal undergarments, and reflective emergency blankets before entering the temperature chamber with casual confidence that sent ripples of unease through the watching crowd. The chamber itself was a technological marvel capable of flash freezing one section while superheating another, creating temperature gradients that would kill most species instantly. The outer walls displayed thermal imaging showing hot areas in bright red and cold areas in deep blue. "Beginning cold cycle," announced the system AI as frost immediately began forming on one side of the chamber. The watching aliens leaned forward, anticipated expressions of shock and pain from the humans. Instead, they witnessed something incomprehensible. "Are they building something?" Plex asked, squinting at the display. Within 30 minutes, the humans had constructed a rudimentary shelter using the emergency blankets, creating a small insulated space in a temperature transition zone. As the cold intensified to 20 C, they huddled together inside their makeshift shelter, their body heat visible on thermal scans as a bright orange, Glow-fascinating adaptation, murmured a xenobiologist. They're using communal body heat to survive. That's not adaptation, that's cooperation, Valtek hissed. It's practically cheating. When the heat cycle began 2 hours later, the human simply moved to a different section using their blankets as shade, and apparently taking turns pouring small amounts of their precious water on each other. They're using evaporative cooling, Plex noted with reluctant admiration. Primitive, but Valtek watched in mounting horror as the humans treated little temperature extremes like a minor inconvenience, alternating between their cold weather and hot weather strategies. With practiced ease, how long do you think it'll take before someone tells them this chamber has exploitable temperature gradient zones? An academy instructor whispered. They already found them, Valtek replied miserably. They found them in the first hour. Third challenge, predator evasion. 60 hours. They survived 60 hours of extreme temperature fluctuations using nothing but emergency blankets and sweating. Valtek's voice modulator cracked with stress. A moisture-based cooling system. Who evolved something so primitive yet so effective? The observing students were no longer pointing and whispering. Many had started taking notes. A few were openly recording the humans' every movement. The academy board had convened an emergency meeting visible through a viewport in their private observation deck. The humans, meanwhile, looked annoyingly refreshed after a brief meal and hydration. Break the predator evasion challenge, Valtek announced, trying to sound authoritative. Despite his crumbling confidence, we'll test your ability to avoid outmaneuver and survive encounters with apex predators from across the galaxy. These creatures have been specifically selected for their hunting prowess. Lieutenant Washington perked up. Now, we're talking. What kind of predators are we dealing with? Plex activate a holographic display showing various terrifying creatures. The Nexian shadow stalker, capable of near-perfect camouflage. The Cronus razorback, which can detect heartbeats from 2 km away. The Viant swarm hunter, which employs pack tactics to cool. Rodriguez interrupted, studying the images with scientific curiosity rather than appropriate terror ASIC strategies for each. Disrupted sightlines and scent masking for the stalker, irregular movement patterns for the heartbeat hunter, and divide and isolate tactics for the swarm species. Standard stuff. The assembled aliens exchanged confused glances. Why do you know this? Valtek asked, genuine curiosity momentarily overriding his frustration. Commander Chen smiled. Earth has some pretty impressive predators too. Tigers, wolves, sharks, tax auditors. You adapt or you don't make it. The challenge duration is 72 hours. Plex continued. You must avoid capture while also reaching designated extraction points every 12 hours. No species has ever completed this challenge in less than 15 years of training. And let me guess, Lieutenant Washington said with a grin. We can't have weapons, correct? Valtek replied, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. Only your natural abilities and basic survival tools. The 3 humans huddled together, speaking in low voices. Then Commander Chen approached. Val, quick question about the rules. Does basic survival tools include things we can make from the environment? What kind of things? Valtek asked suspiciously. Oh, you know, spears, traps, snares, hunting blinds, decoys. The basics. A ripple of alarm spread through the watching aliens. The concept of prey creating tools to counter predators was disturbing on a fundamental level that would be technically permitted. The contract entity flickered reluctantly after cons in its clauses. Great. One more thing, Chen added casually. Do we get points for capturing the predators? Valtek's secondary heart nearly stopped. The goal is survival, not hunting. Right. But hypothetically, if we did capture one, the challenge would end immediately. Plex interjected, as the simulation would be considered compromised. The humans exchanged what could only be described as predatory grins. Understood. Commander Chen nodded. We'll stick to evasion. As the humans entered the sprawling biodiverse habitat that housed the galaxy's most efficient killers, Valtek felt a strange new emotion, concern for the predators. His concern proved justified. Exactly 8 hours later, when the emergency override activated, the habitat doors slid open to reveal 3 humans, slightly scratched and mud-covered, standing proudly beside a makeshift cage containing a very confused Narian shadow stalker, found it now after it ate Something Dr. Rodriguez explained cheerfully, pretty easy to track once we figured out its hunting patterns, but it can turn invisible sputter to security officer Lieutenant Washington shrugged still leaves footprints. Though fourth challenge resource scarcity, the Academy was in chaos. News of the humans' unprecedented progress had spread throughout the station, drawing diplomats, military observers, and even a few black market bookmakers taking outrageous bets on whether the Deathworlders would actually complete the century challenge. In a single day, this is a disaster, Valtek moaned during the hastily convened emergency meeting. They're making a mockery of our most sacred traditions. Admiral Norble, who had approved the humans' application, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should consider this an opportunity for cultural exchange. Tech's voice rose to an ultrasonic pitch that made several crystalline beings vibrate. Dangerously, they captured a shadow stalker using nothing but vines and rocks. The psychological evaluation team is still trying to convince it to come out of hibernation. Meanwhile, the humans were examining the fourth challenge arena with annoying enthusiasm. The resource scarcity challenge, Plex explained, his professional demeanor now tinged with something close to respect, will test your ability to survive in an environment with minimal sustenance, portable water, or shelter materials. Most species required decades to develop the necessary conservation techniques and foraging skills. Commander Chen nodded, surveying the barren landscape through the viewport. How long do we need to last? 90 standard cycles, the equivalent of approximately 3 of your Earth months. Plex replied, you will be provided with 3 days' worth of supplies at the beginning. After that, you must be self-sufficient. Dr. Rodriguez was studying the environmental readouts. Is that serious? A desert transitioning to tundra with nothing in between. That's just lazy biome design. The extreme contrast is intentional. Valtek snapped. It maximizes the survival challenge by preventing adaptation to a single ecosystem. Lieutenant Washington was sorting through their equipment. Are we allowed to bring anything from our ship? Negative. Valtek replied, feeling a small spark of hope. Only Academy-issued supplies are permitted. The humans exchanged glances, then shrugged simultaneously. Fair enough. Commander Chen said, we'll manage. 4 hours later, Valtek and Plex stood in stunned silence as they watched the live feed from the resource scarcity arena. The humans had created a solar still, using their emergency blankets to extract water from seemingly non-existent sources. 2 identified and consumed various synop plants that the safety team had deemed technically non-toxic but extremely unpalatable. 3 constructed a remarkably efficient shelter using minimal materials. 4 set up a rotational sleep schedule to maintain constant surveillance. They're not just surviving, whispered a cynobiologist who had joined the growing crowd of observers. They're thriving. It gets worse, Plex added, pointing to a corner of the screen. They're cultivating those zinar root spores we included as background flora. They've started a farm. Dar Rodriguez's voice came through the monitoring system as she meticulously arranged the alien spores in neat rows. My grandmother grew prize winning yucca in conditions worse than this. It's all about understanding the water cycle and soil composition, but there is no water cycle in the arena. Keck protested, to no one in particular. We specifically designed it with minimal atmospheric moisture. They're creating one, Plex explained, genuine wonder in his voice. See how they've positioned their wastewater collection. They're literally engineering a microclimate. Lieutenant Washington, meanwhile, had fashioned crude hunting tools and was tracking something at the desert's edge. What could he possibly be hunting? Valtek demanded. We stalked no prey animals. The maintenance droids, a technician replied miserably. He's hunting the maintenance droids for parts. Commander Chen's voice crackled through the speakers. Hey Gu, I think we can build a rudimentary moisture evaporator with these servo motors. Anyone remember the schematics from that old movie? Valtek slumped against the observation window. They're not going to need 3 months. Are they? The system projects they'll achieve sustainability benchmarks within 72 hours. Plex confirmed they've already surpassed the 30-year success metrics. Final challenge, combined elements. This is unprecedented. Admiral Norble addressed the emergency session of the Academy's High Council. 4 challenges completed in less than 30 hours. The data alone is revolutionary. Valtek stood before the assembled dignitaries, his career and reputation hanging by a thread. With all due respect, Admiral, this makes a mockery of the century challenge. These humans are treating life-threatening scenarios like recreational activities. That's precisely what makes them so fascinating," countered Professor Sen Lear, the Academy's chief biologist. "Their baseline is survival under conditions most species would consider apocalyptic." The debate was interrupted by Plex rushing into the chamber, his coloration signaling extreme agitation, they demanding the final challenge now. Murmurs swept through the council chamber. The Combined Elements Challenge was traditionally administered only after all previous challenges had been mastered over decades of training. No one had ever attempted it without years of preparation. "Absolutely not," Valtek declared. "It's too dangerous. The Combined Challenge incorporates all previous elements, plus gravity fluctuations, radiation spikes, and psychological warfare simulations. Even I wouldn't survive it." "That's not your decision." Make Admiral Normal said quietly. "According to Academy regulations, if candidates successfully complete the prerequisite challenges, they cannot be denied the opportunity to attempt the final trial." The contract entity flickered in solemn confirmation. 30 minutes later, Valtek stood before the three humans at the entrance to the Combined Elements Arena, a massive environment that could only be described as a hellscape. Zones of toxic gas swirled visibly through areas of extreme temperature. Gravity plates created pockets where objects fell sideways or floated upward. Radiation warnings flashed on the monitoring screens, and the distinctive silhouettes of multiple predator species could be seen prowling through it. "All this is madness," Valtek said, making one final attempt at reason. "The Combined Challenge has a mortality rate of 34%, even among species who've trained for centuries. We cannot guarantee your safety." Commander Chen smiled. "We appreciate your concern, Instructor Valtek, but where we come from, we don't back down from challenges. Our homeworld throws worse at us before breakfast." Lieutenant Washington added with a grin. "Florida alone has weather, wildlife, and humans that make this look like a playground." Dr. Rodriguez was already analyzing the environmental readouts. "Interesting radiation patterns. Reminds me of my postdoc work in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. The barometric pressure shifts are neat too, like hurricane season in the Caribbean." VC's voice softened, genuine concern breaking through his professional demeanor. "You don't understand. This challenge isn't just about physical survival. The psychological warfare elements are designed to break your spirit, to make you give up." The three humans exchanged glances, and something in their expressions changed for the first time. Valtek saw behind their jovial facade to something harder, something forged through adversity. Instructor Commander Chen said quietly, "Humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, climate collapse, and our own self-destructive tendencies. We've endured ended political systems designed to crush our spirits, economic hardships that tested our resolve, and natural disasters that razed our cities to the ground. And you know what we did after each one? We rebuilt." Lieutenant Washington continued. "We adapted, we learned," Dr. Rodriguez finished, "and we came back stronger." VTEC stared at them, suddenly understanding why these seemingly fragile beings had conquered a death world. "Very well," he said, activating the entrance sequence. "The challenge duration is 120 hours. May whatever deities you believe in have mercy on your souls." Commander Chen smiled. "We'll see you in a few hours." "Ours," Plex whispered in disbelief. "Well, maybe 6 or 7. Chen replied with a shrug. "Depends on how interesting things get." In their conclusion, alien instructors' realization and humans' casual departure. 5 hours and 27 minutes. That was the official completion time for the Combined Elements Challenge, a test designed to take 50 years of dedicated training to survive, let alone master. Valtek stood in stunned silence as the three humans emerged from the arena, dirty and somewhat scratched but smiling. Their vital signs were remarkably stable. They were discussing something called brunch, how he finally managed to ask as the entire academy gathered for the unprecedented graduation ceremony. "How is this possible?" Commander Chen accepted the Century Challenge completion certificate with a polite nod. "Honestly, this was pretty mild compared to our officer training And you have to understand, Dr. Rodriguez added, seeing VC's genuine confusion. Humans evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill us at all times. Extreme weather, natural disasters, predators, disease. We adapted to survive at all. Plus, Lieutenant Washington chimed in, we're really competitive. Tell a human something's impossible, and we take it as a personal challenge. As the humans prepared to depart, Valtek felt a strange new emotion, respect, tinged with existential dread. What does this mean for the galaxy? He asked Admiral Norble as they watched the human ship prepare for departure. The Admiral's expression was thoughtful. It means we've been measuring species by the wrong metrics all along. These Deathworlders don't just survive, they thrive on adversity. From the ship's communication system, Commander Chen's voice echoed through the in-bay. Thanks for the interesting day, Academy. We've recommended the Century Challenge to our tourism board as an exciting weekend getaway for adventure enthusiasts. Expect more visitors soon. Tech's primary heart sank as his secondary heart fluttered with newfound awe. The galaxy would never be the same again.